Hi, this is Matt Erpelding from the Boise Metro Chamber of Commerce, and today we are excited to have three guests with us to talk about the future of broadband in the Treasure Valley. Today we have two mayors from the Treasure Valley and a person from the Idaho Department of Commerce. I'm going to start by introducing Mayor Stear. Mayor Stear has been a public servant for nearly 40 years. He owned a machine shop as well, and he's starting his a year into his second term as mayor of Kuna. Mayor Stear, we're lucky to have you. Mayor Simison has been with the city of Meridian for over 12 years and is in his first term as the mayor of Idaho's emerging city, Meridian, Idaho. We're lucky to have you, Mayor. Thanks for being here. And Eric Forsch has been with the Idaho Department of Commerce for 9 years, most recently sliding into a position that was created by the Governor's Task Force for Broadband, and that is the statewide broadband coordinator. And he is the person who's been overseeing grants that were allocated due to the CARES Act. But before we start our panel discussion today, I'd like to just take a moment and speak a little bit about the Boise Metro Chamber of Commerce. As many of you know, the Boise Metro Chamber of Commerce is a 501c6, and we are highly dependent upon the investment of our members, and we are lucky to have Sparklight as our sponsor today. Our mission is to advocate for businesses through education, through advocacy, and through networking. And this is an opportunity for us to talk about a critical issue that is important to our state and in particular important to the Treasure Valley. In addition to supporting us, Sparklight has a message today as they've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in the Treasure Valley and the communities that they serve over the years. And so before we get going, we're going to hear this brief message from Sparklight.
Sparklight is proud to have served Boise residential and business customers for over 40 years. We recognize that high-quality internet is essential in helping families, businesses, and local economies thrive, especially during these difficult times. With speeds up to 1 gig for residential and up to 100 gig for business customers, we are providing Boise with the connectivity they need now and into the future. We've invested $100 million in Idaho over the past 5 years to upgrade our infrastructure and fiber backbone, and will continue to invest in order to provide the fastest, most reliable service in Boise and the communities we serve.
We're so thankful to have Sparklight, and we are excited to have this larger conversation. And Mayor Stear, you're the most seasoned political person here, and we're going to start with you. Kuna is growing at an incredibly rapid pace, particularly toward the south. And as you look at making decisions, high-speed internet is critical. How much does high-speed internet factor into your planning and for the future of industry moving to Kuna?
Well, Matt, it's huge. When I started in 1980 as a volunteer firefighter, we used to call firemen to the station with an air raid siren. And, then we moved on to pagers. And so keeping up with technology is a really important thing. And by the way, for those middle of the night fires, people that lived in town really appreciated when we went from pagers to an air raid siren. So keeping up is incredibly important. Last year this year we've actually had about 700 residential permits issued for building. We have somewhere around 2,600 homes in the development process. And with that growth, having solid infrastructure in place is critical for attracting new business. We've had more homes than commercial and industrial. 95% of our tax base is actually a residential burden. So it's crucial that we get some good commercial business out here. We've focused heavily on economic development. And in the last 2 years, trying to get industrial and commercial properties shovel ready so that we can attract more industry to Kuna. We would like to get an office user. They would not only want to see good internet availability, but they'd also want to see some redundancy to that. So as development happens, we're trying to be forward thinking about building stronger relationships with our local internet providers, so that we have one more piece of the puzzle complete before getting business here.
Mayor Stear and to Mayor Simison, to Mayor Stear's point, in your first 100+ days, broadband internet has been more critical than almost anybody imagined. How important has having high-speed broadband been to government entities over the last 6 months?
Well, Matt, I'd hate to think about where we'd be without broadband, quite frankly. It's really fortunate that both as a city, we started making investments several years ago to connect our facilities and ensure that we had high speed to our city hall and other facilities. But the investment that's been made by Sparklight and others has really allowed us to navigate the challenging times. And, it's ironic, the silver lining of COVID has been that it's forced some of our more traditional institutions, like cities, education, maybe some of the last to react. We've had to make adjustments in order to continue to provide services that people want and expect. And, broadband really makes that happen. We had, when COVID hit, a majority of our city hall-based employees were working from home by late March. Now, I can't say all of them had broadband, but I know several did. And when you're talking about, transitioning to meetings with the community using whatever platform you want, but that broadband was critical, so you didn't have those buffering challenges and other things. And I can only speak for myself. In my house, I was there. I had 3 kids. All of them were doing whatever their schoolwork, I'm sure, all the time. But my house having that ability for us all to be online simultaneously, doing work or playing or doing school, it really allowed us to be able to be in that situation as a city and as a community. And we had been transitioning to our work here at City Hall to allow more online submissions and those things. And, whether it's the upload or the download, that all takes, how long it takes. That broadband is a huge impact for us to be able to transmit plans for a new commercial development. That's all thanks for the investments that have been made in these processes. And now we're really focusing on our public meetings. We were one of the first to really transition to a full virtual public meetings to keep that process moving forward. And we're working to improve upon that. And again, it's really a video-based system, not just here, but in the homes of our residents, which will allow us to have those virtual conversations and allow us to move forward in the best possible way. Now, ultimately, I hope that other cities and Meridian, they learn from what COVID has done, and that we see additional investments through the Idaho Broadband Grant Program using the CARES Act funding, so that all of our communities can better serve our residents by using this technology.
The surrounding communities for us have a little bit more of a struggle. And Eric, the CARES Act money, $50 million roughly is being used as grants to help improve infrastructure in communities that have less than 50% connectivity. And those communities often are outliers outside of Ada County. Most of Ada County has much higher than 50% connectivity. But on the grand scale, how will these grants ultimately help our valley improve in terms of our business and also in terms of managing our growth? Gotta unmute yourself.
Thanks, Matt. So
happens to everybody.
So just building off, I want to build off some comments too that both the mayors said. We're seeing, especially anecdotally and from realtors in town, trends that have been going on for quite some time, but have really picked up steam since COVID-19 hit. And one of those things is, we're still seeing people move to the area or explore Boise for their quality of life. So we're seeing that trend continue. I heard from countless realtors in town where people who were doing work from home periods, they would bring their family and then come hang out in a short-term rental, and basically evaluate the area and see if they could find a place where they wanted to live. And to me, when that was at least initially surprising, because I felt that maybe movement of people would kind of come to a grinding halt. But that hasn't been the case in Idaho, and it hasn't been, and it's certainly Boise Valley is not unique to that. And then, of course, we've been hearing from site selectors across the United States as well, who are interested in finding, basically outlining that companies will be kind of doing this sort of work from home for a majority of their staff. So they don't expect necessarily to be losing a whole lot of commercial space necessarily, but definitely allowing their employees to have that flexibility. And so, to both the mayor's points, I think that's what really gives these communities a lot of great opportunities and allows them to continue to grow. Maybe not in the same way, but you're definitely going to see a lot more movement from people out there. And I think that we'll continue to expect that into even more rural communities. So, and that's where, as your question, Matt, where we kind of are trying to address with the CARES Act dollars that are going to a lot of these rural communities. Those are areas where they don't have 25 megabytes per second download and 3 megabytes per second upload, which is what the FCC defines as broadband. So these grants are really designed to kind of address that. And, I'd say we're pretty lucky that, the Governor Little and the CFAC committee and Director Keeley really decided that they wanted to pursue this strategy and approve this and go down this path. Because certainly we've been getting contact from other states who are kind of curious on what we're doing. So it's pretty great when you have an administration that is looking to kind of think outside the box. Our grant is basically broken down into 3 different sectors. It's targeting households that are underserved. So you look at communities in the larger Treasure Valley metro area, and we certainly have a lot of pockets in those communities, in those areas where people don't have really good access. And and I think that's really important because people are going to be moving outside of Boise. And I love Boise. So this is not saying that they have to move out of Boise, but people are going to be moving from outside the metro areas moving into other communities. And those communities, in order to kind of continue to grow, they need to have broadband. So again, this is really what, we want to make sure those communities are resilient. And so it's really, again, targeting towards households. We're looking at improving broadband and resiliency to those downtown city buildings, which are, not all of them have great connectivity, and of course, improving healthcare facilities across Idaho as well. And again, telehealth is a really important thing going. It was important going, behind us, but now it's going to be even more important going forward. So. Really focusing on those sorts of things.
Building off of that, there's been movement for 5 years now. I was in the legislature when the House voted by one vote to create an incentive for utility scale data centers. And those utility scale data centers continue to be increasingly important in the world, the nation, and especially in Idaho. And Mayor Stear, it's attractive to possibly have a data center move to an area like Kuna. You have all of the makings for a great location. You've got land, access to water, access to cheap power, and you have the broadband piece. How much of a difference would getting a data center in Kuna make for the digital backbone? And what steps are you all taking now that legislation finally passed and was signed by the governor this year?
Well, first, I just want to address, does anybody else find it ironic that I'm talking about keeping up with technology while I'm sitting here with big headphones and flip down? Sorry. No, it's well, first it'd be good to talk about what a data center is and what the legislation does. A data center is basically a big commercial building that houses computer servers and equipment. When you save pictures of the phone, they're typically stored in the cloud, which is really one of the servers within a data center building. While they don't have a lot of jobs, they invest heavily within the community that they locate in, and the jobs that they do have typically pay an average of over $80,000 a year, so good jobs there. The new incentive allows data centers to invest more than $250 million into a facility and bring more than 30 jobs to get a sales tax exemption on some of the server equipment that they frequently would have to replace. For a community like Kuna, having center that invests more than $250 million into a facility and bring more of those jobs, it would significantly benefit our residents with the local tax burden. It could actually reduce our tax base from being 95% residential down to 75% residential with just one good project. Fiber is absolutely one of the key considerations for where a facility will locate, but they also want to be in a place that has good power costs and water and a big enough piece of land that they can continue to expand over time. Before the incentive passed, we actually were a finalist for a data center project that was considering the region, but we ended up not having that pursued because of the sales tax issue. So we're optimistic, especially with the new legislation, that CUNA could be a great location for one of those centers in the future.
You know, Mayor Stear, before we move to another question, I mean, I do think it's important to recognize that as CUNA has been over the years kind of a bedroom community to other more evolved cities, that issue that you were talking about, which is the residential commercial balance from a property tax perspective, a data center could have a huge breakthrough, not just for expanding broadband in the valley and improving broadband in the valley, but on the whole, lowering property taxes on residential consumers around the city. And so it really could be a big benefit to your residents.
Yeah, I think so. And then as I start stealing these big businesses from the city of Meridian, it'll help even more. So.
Mayor Simison, I mean, how does this, broadband and its accessibility make you think differently as a policymaker?
Well, on one hand, Joe can have the big businesses because those buildings are all going to be empty before too long because they're working from home. But in all seriously, I mean, it goes back to, for a long time, I think that the real push was to get broadband and high-speed data internet into the commercial areas. That's where the technology industry, I think, was really focused. But, what we're seeing now is residential is just as, if not more important. Of course, you got to have connection back to the mothership or the hub of the business. But, what you're really seeing, and we saw this even pre-COVID, our conversations with businesses as they were building, even out of 10 Mile, is that when they were talking with businesses, they were already changing their space needs for their employees because they recognized that the new generations of workers wanted to work remotely. And, to be in a community where you've had someone like Sparklight out there, connecting 45,000 homes and businesses with their, gigabyte system, that really opens up every one of those homes is now a business. And I think that, to a certain extent, we need to take that into consideration. And the impacts that can have on your community go well beyond, tax base or anything else. But just we're the center of the valley in transportation. So let me just talk about transportation. What does broadband potentially do to transportation in our community? Well, it can disrupt those traditional commute patterns because we all saw what happened when people were under a stay-at-home order. If people are just working from home, we have fewer people out there commuting. There's less strain and stress on the roadway. That might mean we have to do less investment in our transportation system and network. And that's really the societal gains that you can see from having broadband investment into your home. You see businesses and government and education all saying, well, what does this world look like from a work at home standpoint with this investment? What are the societal gains that we can get with these maybe more balanced lifestyles where, you can be on a meeting in 1 minute and the next minute you can be having lunch with your family who's home from school that day, whereas that's something that we maybe traditionally weren't able to do by going into the office. It also opens up that, at-home parents can now become wage earners. We've seen that over the years where we've all seen the ads, we've all seen the comments when you go to Statesman, work at home, make $9,000 a month doing something from home. Well, quite frankly, whether that's true or not, you can't do that without having a strong home-based computer broadband connection to do a lot of those things. And so it's really helping us look at things a little differently, as we look at maybe capital investment in certain things aren't as important as the broadbands and the other for the e-commerce or retail sides within the residential side of our homes.
Matt, can I add something to what
Yeah, absolutely.
Mayor just said, because I think that's a great point, and something I've tried to stress in my role as an economic developer across the state. Some of the challenges we always see is communities, especially rural communities, who are always struggling. They say, well, what industries can we attract here, and what can we bring in, and maybe I can bring in a new 30-man shop to my community, and that will turn everything around. And to Mayor Simison's point, really one of the huge advantages in this global economy is to really take advantage of broadband and the global way in which you can run a business. I mean, I've talked to businesses in Boise that have, their executive team is located here in Boise, but they operate globally. Sourcing comes out of China, the distribution goes to Tennessee, and then goes out around the world. They handle everything from a small office with a couple of staff that we're working close. Of course, now it can be all done online. You really don't need a whole lot of people, even in the office together, because So I think, to kind of what we're talking about, there's a whole lot of opportunities from an economic development standpoint that allow these communities to kind of grow and adapt in different ways. And really, I think for me, especially in these rural communities, those are really the really great opportunities for those communities to really grow and adapt in different ways. They just need the tools and they need the infrastructure to do that.
And to your point, I was on the governor's broadband task force, and I was on the urban subcommittee, which made several recommendations into how to really ensure that we enhance our urban broadband infrastructure and the broadband backbone. And I'm going to throw a curveball into this question, but can you discuss some of those recommendations and some of the things that were asked? And then we've got a question from the audience that is applicable here, and that is, what type of broadband are we proposing? Wireless, wire, fiber, all of the above. Can you speak to the urban recommendations that were made, and then can you speak a little bit to the types of broadband that you're working with?
Sure, of course, Matt. And I'll just say that I'm a little, we're still trying to get our feet underneath the broadband office, and so this broadband grant threw a little bit of a curveball in terms of what we've accomplished, but. I think one of the major recommendations, which I think is probably the best opportunity out there, is really having a dig once policy and having a plan out there and kind of providing information to providers. And we're well on our way. I have a great partner with the Idaho Department of Transportation that I've been working with. They've been doing a great job. They recognize that broadband is really important. So we already have maps out there kind of highlighting where projects are going to be taking place over the next couple of years. And I think we'll look to kind of build on that and really take a lot of the activity around the state where there's earth being moved and sharing that with the ISP so they can kind of be aware. And so that, to me, that was a recommendation coming out of the task force. I think that's one of the easiest low-hanging fruit objectives to take care of. And I think we'll have huge ramifications for the state. So that's one thing we're looking forward to. I think really just facilitating connections is also really, really important. Getting a lot of the economic developers, especially out in the rural communities, kind of aware of the challenges with broadband. Mayor Stear kind of mentioned, the kind of the opportunities that are associated with getting something like a data center, which is definitely the case. And it's kind of like, helping those economic developers understand, well, you want a kind of a large user to be well connected in your community, because that means it kind of defer or kind of helps with some of the costs of kind of getting some of the households in that rural community. And then, of course, one of the other recommendations that we're trying to tackle is really identifying what other federal grants are out there in the short term. There's a lot. I mean, the RDOF is going to be it's going to be published here soon. The USDA just released distance learning and telemedicine grants. There's a lot of other opportunities that are out there, and me now need to do a much better job of just educating those communities and finding those opportunities. So those are the kind of short-term objectives from the task force that I'm really going to tackle. And then in terms of technology, you're fine, Matt. In terms of technology, we're really technology neutral. It's the key is to really understand, where you can. Not every technology suits every location. If you're in a small town of 300 people, and the closest fiber line to you is 30 miles away, is really fiber to the home a reasonable solution in the short term? And I think that's where kind of figuring out what solution works best and can kind of deliver broadband service in the short term, and then also have a long-term plan, are all things that are really important. And that's why you just got to look at all the options.
Yes, Mayor.
Just to also put a little thing in perspective, yesterday I had the pleasure of touring the Lineman College, which is in Kuna, but has a Meridian address. And I got to learn some good stuff yesterday that I did not realize, that, fiber is up on your telephone poles. I always assumed it was something that had to be buried in the ground, but one of the challenges they have is getting enough people to actually apply to get certified, to get the jobs, to help put the fiber up on the poles. And, here in rural Idaho, that seems like a no-brainer way to, get fiber to some areas of our community and some households. But I think it's even, from that level, just knowing that there's a resource here in our backyard where we can get people trained to help deliver it if the funds are there to deploy it, that's huge. And it was a great learning experience from that standpoint.
Well, and to your point, the difference now is that, in the 30s and 40s, there were laws passed that basically ensured that every American was going to get access to a telephone, and kind of the Connect America program. As we look at, is telephone the only option, and what do we do to transfer our networking system so that people can have access to internet and telephone, often because they're running along the same pipeway? That's really important. There's a question, Mayor Stear, here that is related to kind of what I wanted to chat with you, and that is this idea of what considerations are being made for policy changes to broadband infrastructure and development in municipal code. But I want to go a little further with that, because as Kuna looks to transform itself from a residential community to a mixed-use community that's growing and prosperous, how would an urban renewal district apply here? And then from the perspective of the dig once policy that Eric talked about, how important is it that your public works department have a high-quality relationship with the Valley providers?
Yeah, Matt. So the city's been evaluating the possibility of establishing an urban rural district over the last couple of years. We've actually talked about it for a long time, but none of the projects really ever penciled out. So we're currently in the process of creating a district plan for consideration in the city of Kuna. This tool would allow us to capture new investment dollars and focus them into specific infrastructure projects within a certain boundary of the city. The area being considered covers the entry corridor into Kuna, as well as our downtown and some of our industrial area. Having this tool enables us to assist businesses and developers with sewer lines, lift stations, and getting site shovel ready and putting fiber infrastructure in the ground. One thing that we've been doing for quite a few years is, as we run water and sewer lines down the main roads, is we've been putting conduit in along with that, because we know that's one of the most expensive parts about putting fiber in and underground anyway, is just digging that trench. So obviously we don't like to dig holes twice, like you mentioned, and so that's been very important. We've been doing that. We haven't been able to get those into the developments. We haven't made the developers do that, but at least getting them down the main road so that there's something to hook to there has been very important. We have been reaching out to our fiber providers to talk about how to expand our services in Kuna. We have good relationships with the major providers. including Sparklight and Syringa and CenturyLink. I actually myself use Sparklight at my house. So we're trying to get a policy where new residential or commercial projects are taking place to have open trenches and invite those providers to lay fiber and add to our network abilities. So we're looking into perhaps laying city-owned fiber and coordinating in partnership with fiber companies to lease that infrastructure to serve our community at a lower cost. There's lots of options where we can go in the future, but it's very important that our public works department work alongside these providers so that we know what it is they need to see in the ground, where they want to have it go, and what they can do with it once we get it in there. And then what do we do with it? What's the best way that works out the best for everyone?
There's a question in the comments section that I just want to briefly speak to, and that is, are there any conversations about moving forward and moving toward internet service becoming a public utility in the future? And I'm not asking any of you to comment on that, but I can say my experience on the governor's task force is that the trend is probably away from that. There's currently a law in Idaho called the Idaho Universal Service Fund. It's for telecommunications. It's largely a defunct fund that was designed to make sure that we could fund rural telecommunications systems. And it is largely funded by Meridian and Boise landlines. And those, as they continue to go away, that fund continues to decrease. That's managed by the Public Utilities Commission. We do not see, and I do not see, the state moving toward some type of a public utilities commission regulatory environment for internet and broadband, which means that the importance of broadband often will fall on local municipalities to find ways to get it into their citizens' hands. And it also has some other pluses and minuses, but we did have large discussions around that. And Mayor Simison, this question's for you. You know, Boise and Meridian, in fact, have probably the highest rates of the highest speed internet in almost the entire state of Idaho. And how do you see increasing speeds benefiting the community and pushing our economy forward?
Well, I appreciate that, and let me touch just briefly on what you talked about just before this about cities and utilities. That is something that we at least looked at because the city of Ammon, they do have a broadband utility, and I think for maybe some of our rural communities, I think it's really that conversation with the providers to see what their plans are to bring it to a community. But if there are no plans, cities do have a way that they could look at doing that to help bring broadband to their community, to the residents. But what we've really seen, and TDS just has entered the market here in the state. The competition is really, that's what drives innovation, and that's what drives deployment into our communities. And so that I think is really more likely the future that we will see here in Idaho. Now, back to your main kind of question is, how are we benefiting? Well, I don't think we're just benefiting, but this is really changing our communities in ways that we see, maybe ways we predict, but in ways that we don't even yet grasp. We talked about how broadband can reduce commute time, how that's impacting it. We touched on, it was mentioned earlier, but you can reduce trips to the doctor through telemedicine. So not only does it reduce the impact on your community, but it also changes the way in which people spend their time, how they interact with other people, such as their doctors or others. Maybe it's your financial planner, who knows? But when you don't have to go places, it has the multiple benefits down the line when you think about where broadband can go. The person to person, now it's maybe phone to phone, or can be face to face. But the area where I really see it benefiting and changing our community the most is the one place where we really have only touched on it, and that's in our schools. Higher education has been doing a little bit of online, and we do have some online K-12 providers here in Idaho. The virtual academies, and they've proven that they can put a plan together and be successful. And we're going to see how our more traditional educational, West Data and others, how they're going to adapt to COVID with how much needs to be online. But if you really think about it, if broadband is to every home and online education is something that can be embraced, perhaps this means fewer bonds for new buildings. You have the buildings you have, we can continue to grow, we can have the people that want to go that way versus at home. It could really do a paradigm shift in how our educators are interacting with students, the impacts on our community. It allows great flexibility for our families. I mean, how many people go on vacation for spring break? That's when they choose to go, and everyone goes to Disneyland at the same time. Well, if you can go on vacation and your kid is doing online education, you can still go places and do that online education and still have your family vacation. It really opens up and changes the dynamics of how we interact and how we do things here in the community. Benefit, change, whatever you want to call it. It really provides for an exciting opportunity for your community to think out the box and move in a different direction.
Well, and to your point, COVID has kind of proven that. There's a lot of folks that have been forced to work from home who never would have thought, and as a result, they're still active members of their community. They're still providing work for the economy, but they're working from home, just like you said, with their kids. I was like you. I had a 2-year-old. My wife works full time, and we were using a lot of broadband for about 2 months there. Kind of what Mayor Simison said really resonated with me, Eric, because as increasingly we see more tools that are being deployed, including 5G, we're seeing a massive shift in our economy. But I think it's happening faster than most communities are able to adapt to it. And what would be recommendations that you're making to communities, not just the Ammon model, which is such a cool model and has become a national example, but Idaho Falls had followed in that footstep and put in fiber. But what can communities do to really begin to adapt to the rapid changing environment, including the deployment of 5G wireless?
Yeah, Matt, to Mayor Simison's point, it'd be interesting 5 years from now if we had a global pandemic and everyone had the option of VR, how that would change schools, right? All of a sudden everyone just slips on a headset and engages in school lessons that day from the seat of their own home. And I to kind of Matt, your point, I don't think that world is too far off, honestly. 5G is definitely one of those technologies that we're paying attention to. I always get really excited when I travel to, like I remember last year when I was in Salt Lake and I was in Denver, and you're walking around and my phone automatically, says, "Oh, look, you're at a 5G connection." And so, that technology is happening. You can go downtown and see the 5G towers from Verizon that they're putting up downtown. And of course, T-Mobile, with their merger, is also working on their technology to deploy. So I think there's a lot of great opportunities for communities. The challenge with that always with 5G is that the band wavelength is shorter, so you have to have more towers which are closer. So again, from my perspective, it comes down to, well, you still have to have fiber in the ground. You have to have fiber in the ground to connect those towers. So as with all these communities, it's important to kind of make sure that you're doing everything you can to be investing in fiber as much as you can throughout your community and bringing it to more areas. You have more towers, and your community can have that technology, because that will that in itself will significantly impact how quickly you have 5G in your community. And it's I don't think from my perspective, I think it's 5G deployment will hug in major metro areas first, which is what we're seeing, and then stay close to freeways, primarily in major roads, just because that's where transportation is. I expect, while I enjoy, I've been fortunate enough to drive around using autopilot in a Tesla and watch it drive me around on roads without touching the steering wheel. I don't know if that is something that's realistic for every single car, in the next 2 years. But I will say where I see the opportunities is really with transportation and trucking, and where you have an industry there where there's fewer people wanting to go into the industry. It's tougher to find people who want to move goods, across the state, and it's increasingly more expensive to find those workers. So to me, those are all the ingredients you need to kind of say, well, there's a technology revolution on the horizon, and really one way to kind of help that along is, of course, have more 5G connectivity along with roads, so you can have more pelotons of trucks driving around. So I think that's sort of opportunity we see. But I think, for me, 5G too, for a lot of these rural communities will be a huge game changer. Farming is one of those where you see a ton of potential out there, because what happens is that right now there's a lot of technology using various sensors, including infrared, that you can kind of scan a field, and you can send a drone up to scan over 500 acres and have them basically analyze plant health, and then you could feed that back down and then make changes in your watering or your fertilizing habits, and do that almost instantaneously. And the big hurdle with that technology and making it more widespread is greater connectivity, because basically if you're doing an infrared scan of 500 acres, you can imagine the amount of data that's compiled, and how long it takes to get to your combine or your computer where you're adjusting watering. So getting more connectivity, 5G definitely is, I think, the answer down the road, and will be the better solution to having better speeds. But just again, bringing more fiber to allow those sorts of opportunities to happen and to make farming more efficient for a lot of these communities is vital. So those are the sorts of things that I really see. And again, just working, like my job would be working with providers like Sparklight to say, how can we have more fiber in this community, and what do we need to do? We're opening up the ground to move dirt along this road with ITD. Is there an opportunity to lay more fiber and conduit for you? So again, like those sorts of things will ultimately help the deployment of 5G around the state of Idaho, and make it a lower barrier cost for a lot of the companies who are looking to deploy it.
Eric, there's a question that came through the comments that I don't know if you're prepared to answer, but I'm going to send you a curveball. On the grant process, I know you all are requiring the communities that are applying for bids to use the state purchasing requirements, but does that mean that they'll have to have bidded contracts, or are they allowed to use no bid contracts? What is the plan for implementing this to make sure that we protect private businesses and get the best price for our cities?
Sure, Matt. I mean, ultimately, from a state perspective, we didn't really have a dog in the fight. We want communities to follow rules, and so it was up to the communities to kind of determine really what purchasing. Following state procurement laws, but just decide what they wanted, the approach they wanted to take. So that was kind of that was the option we and the direction we had, and that's what we followed. So I mean, communities know best what they want to do and what they can do in their communities.
It's been 45 minutes. I feel like we could talk about this all day. Mayor Stear and Mayor Simison, I just appreciate you two and the work that you're doing to advocate for your cities, which are the two big emerging cities in the valley. And I know how hard it is to be a mayor right now, or at least I can imagine how hard it is to be a mayor right now. And you two are doing great work. We appreciate you joining us today. Eric, we also appreciate the work you're doing to advocate for a statewide broadband system. Do any of you have anything that you've left on the table that you'd like to mention right now?
Matt, I would like to just say, it's an odd time to be a mayor, but I live in a great community, and the folks here have been pretty patient with things going on. So I'm happy about that. I'm looking forward to the future and making sure that as we grow, we do things the right way. Even with our urban renewal district, I definitely want to be known as one of the ones that did that right, so that we don't get a lot of criticism from it. And I think it can be a great tool when we use it the way it's intended to be used. So thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Absolutely.
Matt, and just thank you to the Chamber for hosting this and for the invitation. And I appreciate it. Eric was the one that talked about 5G. Appreciate that very much.
Well, I appreciate y'all. I want to thank Sparklight. Sparklight is a leader in the Valley. They're deeply invested in our community, and they know that the future of our world is really dependent upon an ability to push information through their through our internet backbone. So I want to thank you all for a great conversation, and I want to thank the folks that have watched today, and we'll see you all again soon.